Welcome to Hurry Up Pinball, a show where I teach you how to work on your pinball machine. Today I'll be walking you through part 2 of a series on how to install a pinball hardtop. So grab your tools and let's get going. I want to preface this video by stating that you can lay down the hardtop over the existing artwork after you level and fix any pinball inserts. You will also need to sand off any old decals on the inserts since the new hardtop has the artwork already on it. I wanted to learn as much as possible and decided to completely strip the playfield since I would be redoing the shooter lane as well. This added a good bit of time to the hardtop install, but I felt it was well worth it. Before you begin sanding, I would highly recommend taping off large holes, switch holes, and drop target holes. I used 120 grit sandpaper and an orbital sander to remove the playfield art. This process was very dirty, so I snapped some pictures along the way as opposed to filming it with my camera. When removing the playfield art, be sure to wear protective gear as some of the paint used on older pins may contain lead. I would also recommend doing this outside as I spent a very long time trying to remove the dust from everything in the garage. For the shooter lane, I would recommend taking a wood dowel slightly larger than the shooter lane and wrapping it in a folded paper towel. Then wrap the dowel and paper towel in some 120 grit sandpaper and gently sand down the shooter lane. Don't go crazy and remove a bunch of wood. Just follow the groove and remove enough to clean it up and sand out any minor damage. Since the hardtop does not cover the shooter lane, you may want to do this if you have damage to your shooter lane. If you need to, you can also get tough to reach areas with your fingers as opposed to using the dowel. After sanding with 120 grit, I moved up to 320 grit sandpaper and went over the playfield and the inserts to level them and remove any scratches from the 120 grit sandpaper. For the inserts, I would recommend hitting them again with 400 to really smooth them out. Here is a picture of the playfield with all of the art removed after it was sanded with 120 grit and 320 grit sandpaper. Again, I went over the inserts with 400 grit sandpaper to really polish them up and smooth them out. After I finished sanding, I used a shop vac to remove as much dust as possible. I'm using my hand to keep the nozzle of the vacuum off of the playfield by about a half an inch to avoid scratching the wood with the plastic. Be sure to go over the entire playfield and get as much dirt and debris out of the inserts, light sockets, and the holes in the playfield. Here's what the playfield looked like after I removed the dust with the vacuum. Now grab a clean towel and wipe off any dust that you see on top of the playfield. Check for any areas you may have missed while sanding or any heavily scratched inserts. With the dust removed, grab a clean rag and wipe the playfield down with some naphtha. When you wipe over the inserts with naphtha, you will see how the inserts will look once sprayed with clear until the naphtha evaporates. If you see any inserts that look rough, block sand them to remove any issues. Make sure to sand any inserts with a block and don't do it with your fingers as you are likely to sand down the wood around the edges of the insert. By doing some research online, I found that you can use earplugs in light bulb sockets and playfield holes to plug them up. I cut a standard earplug in half for most of the light sockets. I will be leaving these in place when I spray the clear. You can combine 2 or more earplugs for larger holes in the playfield, or you can tape them off. This is an inexpensive way to plug up the holes in the playfield. You can also reuse these plugs if you need to take them out and put them back in later. Here's my method for taping off saucers prior to spraying clear. Be careful when using the X-Acto knife so that you don't cut into your fingers or the playfield wood. For some of the larger light sockets, I typically ball up some painter's tape and place it in the socket hole. Here's the method that I use for taping up drop target holes. For this drop target bank, I loosened the screws on the bottom and it gave me enough room to keep from having to completely remove the drop target bank. If you completely remove the drop target bank, tape it from the bottom. Don't forget to tape up any exposed metal parts if you do not want to remove them. If you are not going to remove the flipper bracket sleeves, be sure to close up the flipper shaft holes with earplugs as well. I decided to do a flipper rebuild kit, so I knew these would be replaced eventually. Before spraying clear on the playfield, I would recommend lowering it closer to the ground to make it easier to spray. If you don't have any sawhorses, you can also place a storage container upside down and place the box on top of it. Before spraying clear, be sure to double check everything is sealed up as necessary using painter's tape or earplugs. It is also a very good idea to go over the playfield to make sure there is no excess dirt or debris. I will be using Rust-Oleum 2X Ultra Cover Gloss Clear. This is available at most hardware stores. One can should be plenty for a hardtop install, but I would recommend getting a second can if you plan on spraying several coats on the shooter lane. Don't forget to wear protective gear when spraying. This mask removes odors and filters some air as well. It is not on par with a full respirator, but will offer some lung protection. If you have a full respirator, use it. Here's the part of the video where I tell you about the mistake I made so you don't have to. When spraying clear on the playfield, I used sweeping arcs but laid down way too much clear. I thought the more that I put down, the better it would look and that it would even out and be nice and smooth. You can see from the sped up video that I am really laying it on thick. Immediately after I sprayed, everything looked great. I was so concerned about making sure that everything was fully covered that I just sprayed too much clear on the playfield. I didn't think this was going to be an issue, and at first it didn't seem to be a problem. During this process, I was also using a small razor blade to remove any pieces of dust or particles that ended up on the playfield. Here you can see I took many trips back and forth and kept spraying on top of the clear. Here's how everything looked immediately after I sprayed all the clear on the playfield. Everything looks even and I was happy with the way it looked. I was certain that everything was going to dry and it was going to look fantastic. About 10 minutes after I finished spraying, I noticed that a lot of the inserts had what appeared to be hairline cracks in them. Upon further inspection, I find out that when the clear coat is sprayed on too thick and begins to dry, the surface tension pulls on the clear and causes these hairline cracks. You cannot polish these cracks out as they typically go through all of the clear and down to the original insert. In the freeze frame above, you can clearly see the gigantic crack in the massive insert in the middle of the playfield. I found these cracks in many of the other inserts as well. Because of this, I sanded the entire playfield again to remove what I sprayed and started from square one. I even laid it on too thick the second time and I sanded it down again. This was not fun, and being that clear should dry a minimum of 2 days between coats, it resulted in a 4-day delay with 2 failed attempts. I had to sand everything, vacuum, dust, and clean everything with naphtha again. This required me to remove the earplugs and reinstall them again as well. Removing all the hard work you did and starting from scratch is pretty frustrating. I decided to leave this in the video to help any of those folks out there who are doing this avoid making the same mistakes that I did. Now that everything is sanded down again, I'm going to wipe it down with naphtha and check the inserts. The third time was the charm. I learned that you need to spray a very, very light mist over the inserts to avoid the cracking issue. I also raised my arm up higher to reduce the amount of concentrated spray on the playfield. Here you can see just how light I am going on the clear. Less is better when spraying the clear over the inserts. I intentionally left this part of the video in real time so you can get a sense of how I sprayed it and how long it took. Again, I am going over the entire playfield, but I'm going with an extremely light coat from a pretty high distance. It may seem like the coat is super light and not enough, but I can promise you it's much better than putting too much down on the playfield. I did want to make sure that I got enough on the shooter lane, so when I sprayed, I tried to avoid spraying over inserts while also spraying the shooter lane. If you are using a handle on your spray can, be careful when shaking the rattle can. Sometimes I found that the can will actually shift in the handle and the nozzle will be facing sideways. If you spray with a lever, it will then pull up inside the handle and then drip onto whatever you're working on. Another good trick is to use a small board to keep the spray from hitting the inserts. I also wanted to make sure I sprayed a little bit of extra clear on the bottom of the playfield where the hardtop has no graphics. With the lighter coat, you can now see that there's not any cracking over the inserts and all the inserts look crystal clear. Again, I chose to sand the whole playfield down, and you can probably save some work by only sanding around the inserts. Just make sure whatever you decide to do that the inserts are level and that you sand off any old decals on the playfield, and that the shooter lane is up to your expectations before installing the hardtop. If you just sand the old decals off the inserts, make sure to spray a very light coat of clear over them before installing the hardtop. Here's what the shooter lane looked like about 10 minutes after I sprayed the first coat of clear. Since I was happy with the rest of the playfield, I ended up taping off the shooter lane and sprayed several more coats with very light sanding in between. I taped the shooter lane off in an area that would be under a wood rail. I would recommend letting the clear dry for at least 2 days between sanding and recoating. Once everything is done being sprayed, let the playfield gas off for at least 5 days. This will help you avoid any issues when applying the hardtop to the playfield if the clear hasn't completely gassed off yet. After the playfield has gassed off, I used some Nuvis 2 and hand polished up the shooter lane, the inserts, and the rest of the playfield to knock down the gritty feel of the clear. I spent extra time on the shooter lane since it wouldn't be covered with the hardtop. Once that was complete, I wiped it down one more time with naphtha to remove any dirt and debris. Again, you want to check the inserts to make sure everything looks good. Once the hardtop goes down, you're not able to go back and fix anything. Here you can see that the playfield is now ready for the hardtop to be installed. The shooter lane is also complete and has had several coats of clear and several sandings. The inserts are also very clear. I'm happy with my decision to completely sand down the playfield, and I really like the way that it looks prior to the hardtop being installed. After I install the hardtop, I will also be adding some mylar to the shooter lane to protect the work that I did. Be sure to check out part 3 of this series where I will go over installing the hardtop. This is Craig with HurryUpPinball, and I wanted to say thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, show your support for HurryUpPinball and click the subscribe button. We can also be found on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under HurryUpPinball.